Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series. Can we save the Oakland A's? And as we mentioned close to a week ago, this is going to be our last episode for about a week, unfortunately. Hopefully we will be back next weekend, the weekend of the 27th and 28th. At some point we will be back online at that point and continuing with this quest to guide these A's to what will hopefully be a winning season and hopefully be a third playoff appearance in the last 4 seasons. And before we get started with this episode in earnest, in which we're hopefully going to get to the midway point of this season and do our mid-season review, try to figure out exactly what we need to do to improve this team as we get closer to the trade deadline. Want to catch up on a few housekeeping items and some interesting comments that have been made over the last few episodes that I wanted to circle back on. The first is one from the last episode from YME943, where just suggested to consider selling if things don't go well over the next month and a half or so. And I certainly will consider that, but I am nowhere near the point where I'm willing to sell quite yet, as I noted in my response to him. This team, according to Pythagorean expectations, should be above 500, so we've gotten unlucky so far this year. And I still want to invest in the team. And on that front, we've made a couple of relatively minor trades. First one, something that Jack Hammer Possessor kind of noted a couple of episodes ago, that Judd Fabian, who was basically the last guy to make our team out of spring training as a minor league free agent signing, is not all that exciting a player. He had actually done reasonably well for us. He was a bit above average offensively with a 104 WRC plus. Did have 4 homers and 17 ribbies and 68 at-bats. That said, he had still struck out 27 times. He was still hitting 206. He was a bit above replacement level. Good defensive outfielder, has a little bit of speed. But when we look at what he's done over the course of his major league career, despite the fact that he's been effective for us this year, playing primarily against left-handed pitching, he's been a below-average offensive player. He's 31 years old, certainly not a big part of our future, and I think we can replace him with a different right-handed hitting outfielder to play occasionally against left-handed pitching. So we used him to acquire Kevin Kelly from the Texas Rangers. Not typically the type of guy I would go for, only because we only have high scouting accuracy on him for some reason, even though he's a 34-year-old and a consistent major league veteran. But we needed some help for our bullpen, which hasn't been great. And looking at Kelly over the course of his major league career, every single stop that he has had over the course of his career, he has been an above-average pitcher, looking at his ERA plus and his FIP minus. So the hope is that he can continue that here, hopefully help stabilize our bullpen a bit. He does not have exceptional stuff by any means, but his movement and control are both above average. And we didn't have to take on any of his contract, fortunately. The Cardinals had already been retaining 60% of it when he went to the Rangers. We got the Rangers to keep the last 40%, so it also saves us a little bit money. To open up the roster spot for him, Cole Henry, who had done a decidedly mediocre job, possibly even a bad job for us this year with a 5.51 ERA in 16 1/3 innings, refused an assignment to AAA, even though he was originally on a minor league contract, and he does have one option year left. So we basically just traded him away for whatever we could get, which is not much. 37-year-old J.P. Crawford, who's on a minor league contract and is fragile physically, not really quite a major leaguer at this point, but it opened up a 40-man roster spot for us and saved the money that we were going to be paying to Cole Henry. So from that perspective, I think that the addition of Kelly to our bullpen will hopefully be helpful. And we also did add on to the team John Rhodes, who had been in AAA for us this year. As I said, a pretty generic right-handed hitter, competent defensive outfielder, has a little bit of pop in the bat against left-handed pitching, also can hopefully draw a few walks there. Think he is likely to provide similar performance to what we got from Judd, and because of that, felt we were more than willing to use Judd to bring Kelly on board, and hopefully Kelly can help stabilize this pitching staff. Speaking of the pitching staff, Holdor suggested that with the struggles that Andrew Nardi has had as our closer, with a 6.50 ERA and 4 losses already, and the fact that he's been below replacement level, that we perhaps consider swapping Chase Lee back into that role, and we're going to take that advice here as well. Hopefully Lee, who has been our closer for most of the past several seasons at one point or another, will stabilize that position a bit, and Nardi can straighten himself out, working in a little less pressure in a setup role. As we get to the final housekeeping items, just to let you know what we're thinking, Jeansy asked what had happened with Sergio Estrada. You may remember was a 27, now 28-year-old that we signed to a minor league deal with a major league option out of Cuba this past offseason. Although the bat doesn't look like it's going to be devastatingly effective, particularly against right-handed pitching. Probably more of a platoon guy who could play against left-handed pitching for us. We do like the glove, and we've been trying to expand the versatility of the glove, playing him at second and third base in the minors. But Jeansy asked what was up with him, and it was a very relevant question because we had 30 days to decide what to do with him, and in my negligence of the previous episode, I missed that 30-day deadline. I mentioned in the comment to Jeansy that when I'm trying to put an episode out, I'm not always like actually thinking as deeply about the game as I should be, which is not a good commentary on how I'm actually playing the game right now and doing these videos, but also particularly with the fact that it was the penultimate video before I had to take a week break. Was also kind of just rushing to get through the video and get on with some of life's business, unfortunately. So I missed Estrada, and he chose to opt out, and he went to the Cleveland organization where he, you can see, played 12 games in AAA for them. And given that I do think he could have some value for us next year when presumably Brian Rincon is finally going to be gone from the Oakland A's. Because of my stupidity, I kind of had to pay a tax and went to see what it would take for us to trade back from him. And we had to give up Lawrence Butler, who was in our organization this year, doing a pretty solid job for us in AAA. You may remember he was our longtime right fielder, a really good 4A guy, but not honestly a huge part of our future. So I was willing to give Butler up. We've got plenty of left-handed hitters in AAA right now who are potential outfielders who could help us if we need. Jared Kelnick most highly among them, and I think I'd bring up Kelnick before I would have brought up Butler. So a minor tax to pay for my stupidity, but a stupidity tax nonetheless. But fortunately, Estrada is back in our organization, and I guess the positive thing is since he opted out of the contract, it's just a minor league deal now. It's not a minor league deal with major league options since we had to trade back for him from Cleveland. And one final point that's been brought up by our loyal and appreciated viewers that we wanted to talk about was Bobby Cabral. A couple episodes ago, Jackhammer Possessor suggested, hey, you traded for this guy last offseason. He looks like he could be a big part of your future. He just had a monster result in the development lab in terms of increasing his power and increasing his ceiling with his power. You should think about trying to sign him to a long-term deal, and YME943 has shared similar sentiments about that being a good move for us. And based on what Cabral has done for us, hitting 273 with 15 homers and 38 ribbies and 172 at-bats, a 151 WRC plus, I think that was great advice from both Jack Hammer Possessor and YME943. Unfortunately, given that he had less than a year of service when he started with us, I wanted to be a little bit patient, given that I don't love his high strikeout rating, or his proclivity towards strikeouts more accurately, and I was a little worried about his contact despite the really good power. But unfortunately, that patience hasn't paid off, as the price for him is getting quite extreme. He's now looking for 9 years and $140 million. So given that we've got him at the league minimum next year, and possibly the league minimum a season after that, followed by 3 ARB seasons, my hunch is to just let him play out through his 30s with us at this point at relatively inexpensive deals, and we'll see how his career goes. Clearly, in retrospect, with the way he's playing, wish I had struck a month and a half, 2 months ago when I first started thinking about this and the price was lower. But those are the decisions we make. They aren't always good, but hopefully we'll be getting very good and very low-priced production from Burner Cabral for the next several seasons. And before we start moving forward and trying to figure out if this team can make up some of the gap on the Astros as well as the Mariners and the Angels here in the AL West, just want to check in briefly on a few of the better prospects in our organization who may be able to help us later this year in this effort to guide this team to the playoffs. And the prospect who I think is least likely to help us this year is probably Jaheim Penniman. He's recovered from that torn flexor tendon that derailed his season a year ago, and he's 7-1 in Double-A for us with a 3.92 ERA. So he's been pretty solid there this year. Likely we'll be promoting him to Triple-A in a month or so. He looks like he is more than competent for Double-A at this point. Still, his stuff and his movement as well as his control aren't quite up to snuff for Triple-A, so probably going to give him another month in Double-A before we promote him. This is a player who was second overall pick in 2028. Quite honestly, looking at his profile, looks like he's more likely to be a guy rather than the guy, unfortunately. Still has 3 major league quality pitches and the potential to develop 3 others to close to or better than major league quality. So I think he'll have a pretty versatile arsenal. The control is the question for him, and we have updated his settings as far as his developmental training plan to just dump as much attention as possible into his control, given that we don't think the sinker is going to be a particularly effective pitch for him. He's 45 of 45 on that at this point. That's the area that we're ignoring a bit, but hopefully we can jumpstart his control a little bit more over the coming months and eventually get him up to Triple-A shortly. Could be a September call-up for us, depending on what happens with the pitching staff, but maybe a little bit early for the 22-year-old, given the way he looks right now. 2 players who we have just promoted from Double-A to Triple-A, though, might be able to help us a little sooner than Mr. Penniman. Sam Bailey was a 4th-round pick of ours in 2030 out of UNLV. He has moved up through our system pretty well. Spent last year in high A and double A, and started out this year in double A again, which has run his one-loss record in double A to 13-0. This year 8-0 with a 1.14 ERA. Not a lot for him to prove in the Texas League, so we've just promoted him up to the PCL. I think his stuff is maybe still a little bit light for that level, but clearly he does not have anything left to prove in double A. Doesn't throw incredibly hard, just barely touches 90 miles an hour. Don't think he's a big part of our future, but think that he could be a useful arm to eat some innings in a cost-effective fashion at the major league level down the line. And another college player who we actually picked in that same draft, Bob Day, out of Pepperdine, who was a third baseman by trade, but we've been working to train a little bit as a left fielder. Also just earned a promotion to AAA for us. He's a right-handed hitter, so he could be eventually what we need in this lineup. Honestly, I think that the outfielder that we just promoted is not going to be with us for the long term, and someone like Day conceivably could fill that spot against left-handed pitching more effectively in the not-too-distant future. Day started this year in AAA for us and has hit .331 with 13 homers and 41 ribbies and 166 at-bats. He has been incredibly successful at each stop along his path in this organization. So time to promote him to AAA. You can see AA, he was a monster, which we saw in terms of his ratings. Still think he's going to be pretty effective in the PCL. And honestly, in the majors, he's not far off major league quality. As I noted, I think he can actually potentially be a better bat for us than I expect John Rhodes to be, and he's certainly a bigger part of our future potentially than John Rhodes is, but going to try to get him completely proficient at left field over the next month or so. Admittedly, with that 45 range and 45 arm, he's never going to be a great defensive outfielder for us, but he's also a guy who, with his middling range, error, and arm ratings and a well below average turn double play rating, is never going to be a dynamic infielder for us, except for perhaps at first base. But hopefully we'll have him versatile enough to play multiple positions, and as I noted when I promoted, or I haven't noted this, but in the thought of my mind, promoting Day to AAA and having a guy like Rhodes there to fill in for Fabian made me a little more comfortable using Fabian in that trade to bring on the pitching help that hopefully will help us straighten out this bullpen and ultimately straighten out this team in the coming months. And with that, I'm finally done talking to you about what I've done and what I'm thinking, and we're ready to start seeing if any of these moves are going to pay off for us. And unfortunately, this insanely streaky and generally more losing streaky than winning streaky season has continued for the A's. Mentioned at the end of our last episode that we had won our last 5 in May to be feeling a little better about the team, and then proceeded to lose our first 4 of the month of June, and we've now lost 5 out of 6 games in June. Got a couple with Texas coming up, followed by Baltimore, then home against Seattle in Toronto over the next couple of weeks. 5 games in the division, and then 4 against AL East teams. So, and then we'll be finishing up back in the AL East with Boston, Toronto, and the Yankees on a long road trip. So, going to be a good test for this team. We're now 10.5 games out, still in 4th place. So clearly, the moves that we made, admittedly minor, have not jump-started things for us in a positive way yet. Things went a little better this week. We split 2 games in Texas, but then we did take 3 out of 4 on the road at Baltimore. So hopefully we can take both series on this 7-game homestand against the Mariners and the Blue Jays before we head out for that long road trip in the Northeast and Ontario. And we did have another winning week, but it was barely a winning week. We lost 2 out of 3 at home against Seattle, but we did take 3 out of 4 against Toronto. Interestingly, lost 1-run games in extra innings, 3-2 in the final game of each series. So the challenges we had in 1-run games a couple years ago, not manifesting themselves the same way this year, but our record is down to 9-12 in 1-run games. 34-38, so we're 12 games behind at this point, although we've been playing a bit better over the last couple weeks. Pythagorean-wise, still should be 38-34, so we're playing better than our record indicates. We have dipped materially to 11th in the league in runs scored. We had been definitely kind of outperforming a lot of the other statistics in the early stages of the season, and you can see where kind of the bottom third of the league in a lot of offensive categories, and not surprisingly, that's added up to 11th in the league in runs scored. 5th in runs allowed. We've improved the defensive efficiency up to 4th, despite the 4 losses in a row and the 5 of 6 to start the month of June. We're close to 500 for the month at 9-10. Clearly, the hope would be that over the final series on the road against Boston, Toronto, and the Yankees, and that series does include and continue to Thursday, July 1st with the Yankees, that we can be a game over 500 at least in that road trip and have a 500 or better month when all is said and done, to feel like we've at least stabilized things a little bit with this roster. Clearly just being 500 isn't good enough, and we're going to have to string some winning months together, but after the nightmare that most of May and the beginning of June were, it's good to see that we're playing a little more competitively right now. And unfortunately, we're not going to get the winning road trip that we had hoped for. We did take 2 out of 3 in Boston, but then we lost 2 out of 3 in Toronto, and we've lost 2 out of 3 against the Yankees now. Still have the final game of the series here on July 1st, but as we sit here 81 games into the season, halfway through the season, we're certainly off target in terms of our goal to get this team above 500. Still 4th place in the AL West, and we've now fallen 15 games behind the mighty Houston Astros. Only a game and a half out of a wild card at this point. The Rays at below 500 have that final wild card spot. So we are still definitely lurking in the playoff race, but undoubtedly need to play better than we have over the past couple of months. Checking in on Shoji Bame, who we thought about bringing on board this offseason, made a couple offers to, and he is having a monster season for the Dodgers. Clearly, if we had gotten, if we'd been guaranteed we'd be able to get this type of production from him, would have signed up for it in a second. But you never know what players are going to look like in their first season in the United States. At least that's my experience. Sometimes they don't seem to perform quite up to their ratings. But Bame, the professor, certainly is. 294 average, 24 homers, and 68 ribbies for the Dodgers at about the midway point of the season, with a ridiculous 148 WRC plus and a 3.5 WAR. Yes, that bat certainly would help us right now. And we just lost the final game of the road trip to the Yankees, 12-2. So we dropped to 38-44 here, 82 games through the season. And we've finally getting our mid-season review from Mr. Fisher. Not happy with our record because he wanted us to have a winning record as we did. Wants us to improve more in home runs. wants us to improve more in our draft record, wants us to improve more in fan interest, and wants us to improve more in extra inning games. So not a great report card by any measure. He's been good with our progress towards goals over time, happy with our overall performance, but clearly we are not excelling at anything here in 2032. Hasn't been that long since we checked in on the team statistics, but we'll see where we actually stand. 38 and 44, still 4 games below Pythagorean expectations. 2 straight losing months now after that solid start to the season in April. 12th in the league in runs scored, 13th in the league in homers, 5th in the league in runs allowed. So the pitching has still been solid, particularly the bullpen. Hopefully the starters can be better down the line. Take a quick look before we look into our team as to if anyone interesting is on the trade block yet. And position player-wise, not necessarily a ton of impact players. We still have Rincon listed on the market in case someone blows us away with an offer for him. Marco Luciano is fragile and bad personality and has a little calf soreness right now. Matt McLean dealing with a fractured foot. Our former outfielder Esteury Ruiz also available. Pitching wise, Ty Madden is back on the block. He was not when we made that previous trade with Texas. This is a guy that was on the block this past offseason. Thought about trying to bring him on board. The price was relatively high. Our former starter Shane Baz also on the trade block as well. So there could be some options there. Ty Madden making some big money, but we can kind of afford to bring him on board if we were going to use pretty much every penny that we had left because we're just past the midway point of the season. Unfortunately, only Colt Keith, who's the best player on our team, although his batting average has dipped to .241 this year, or 2 of the top prospects in our system in Uresti and Saldana, can get us Madden. Check in on those guys while we're talking about them. Arturo Uresti, second year in the Dominican League this year, hitting 300 once again. Would hope that we can promote him in the not too distant future. He's more than competent for the Dominican League, but you can see it still looks like he'd struggle, particularly making contact in A-ball. But at some point we will get the number 34 prospect up to A-ball this year, simply because it doesn't look like there's a ton for him to prove in the DSL. And Saldana, the pitching prospect that we made our cornerstone IAFA signing this year, we promoted him right to the DSL as 17 years old. We talked about he was pretty far along for a 17-year-old in terms of his stuff and his movement. And you can see that he's got very strong ratings for the DSL. A 2-1 record with a 1.85 ERA, so he's off to an excellent start in his professional career as well. Looks like he can probably compete in the California League at the single A level at this point. Given that he's only 17, I'm a little less inclined to potentially rush him up there. But it's not inconceivable that we might give him a crack at the A-ball level as the season moves along. I don't know that I would give up any of these 3 guys to pick up Madden, but there is an option there for us to certainly add a starter who could help our rotation. He's only 4-7 this year. Texas is the one team that's behind us in the AL West, but his 3.22 ERA and his 1.5 WAR are both solid. And then our old buddy Shane Baz, who had a nice year for us a year ago, 3.81 ERA and a 2 WAR for us as a 1-year rental coming off of an injury. Look at the trade options for Mr. Baz, and more of a sample set that we could potentially send to bring him on board. But it's all still very important major league players or the top prospects in our organization. But Boz may be a bit more realistic of a target for us. He's also with that bad Texas team, a 1-6 record, 4.17 ERA. So he hasn't been exceptional this year, but certainly with that 1.4 WAR has been respectable as a starter. And those may be two guys that we think about bringing on board over the next 3 or 4 weeks as we close in on the trade deadline and try to improve this team. And as I noted, overall the pitching has not been our problem, but honestly, with our starting rotation, only Jackson Ferris has been what you would call good. The record only 7-7, but a 3.33 ERA, 118 strikeouts in 97 1/3 innings, and a 3.3 WAR. He's following up an excellent season a year ago with arguably an even better season. Chase Burns, Jason DeCaro, and Mason Miller, very similar seasons. All have 4-5 records. All have ERAs in the low to mid fours. They've been respectable, but not great. Burns, 2.1 wins above replacement. DeCaro, 0.8 wins above replacement. And Mason Miller, 1.1 wins above replacement. I don't see a need to necessarily replace any of them in the bullpen or in the rotation. The guy that we'd be moving on from is Caden Dana, who's the guy we plugged in this year to replace Boz. His ratings in his arsenal indicate that he should be a decent starter. But we haven't gotten that out of him this year. A 2-5 record, 5.55 ERA. He's allowed 12 homers and 39 walks in 82 2/3 innings. He was better for us last year as a reliever, although his WAR is higher this year than it was a year ago. But he would be the one whose spot is in jeopardy, and hopefully if Dana moved back to the bullpen, that could help us there. Chase Lee, now in the closer role. Of course, his ERA has gone up since he's been in that role for us to 4.64, 1-6 record for Chase Lee. So we're still struggling in the closer role. Might be time to move the new addition Kevin Kelly into that role, as he has a glittering 0.61 ERA over his first 14 2/3 innings with the team. Nardi has lowered his ERA since he's moved out of the closer role. Still a 3-5 record with a 5.34 ERA, though, well below replacement level on the year. Jeremy Scholl, the youngster's been solid with a 3.35 ERA over 48 1/3 innings. Mason Black has been respectable, as has Alex Vesia. And Henry Lelane, who is a guy who could potentially move into the rotation, has been respectable out of the bullpen, as has Jose Acuna. We are going to be, when we get back in the saddle a week from now, certainly looking for options in the trade market to help this pitching staff. But in the meantime, I think I'm going to put the left-hander Lelane in for Caden Dana. Dana just hasn't done the job for us, and feel like we've got to try something different, and maybe having a second lefty in the rotation with Lelane, even though his stuff is not supposedly as good as Dana's, and he's only got a 3-pitch arsenal rather than the 4-pitch arsenal that Dana has. Again, what Dana's given us in the rotation is not working, so we're going to try to do something else. But as much as we'd like to add a starter, and we probably will add someone into the rotation at some point, particularly if the prices on Madden or Boz come down a bit, or we're able to maybe put a package together that avoids us giving up guys who are important to the team this year or the top prospects in our organization. The area that most likely is going to need some attention is our offense and our position players, and we'll take a look at the ragtag group that has not gotten the job done the way we would want this year right now. Drake Baldwin, likely in his final year as our catcher, has done his job. He's hit .258, been a league average offensive player, a win above replacement, thanks largely to his very good defense. So hasn't necessarily helped us offensively, but he hasn't really hurt us either. And on this team, that's progress. Max Kaufer, .252 average, but only one home run in 119 at-bats, and most sickly, he's walked just 3 times all season. So unfortunately, he's put up a 68 WRC plus for us. We were hoping that the right-handed hitter, who looks a little bit better against left-handed pitching than he is against right-handed pitching, and is only starting against left-handed pitching, would be closer to a league average offensive player for us. Hasn't materialized yet. He's still above replacement level, still has a really good glove. Is a backup catcher, he's fine. Just would have hoped that he could be a little more productive playing primarily against left-handed pitching. I guess we can look at the stats here rather than just talking about it. You can see a 68 WRC plus on the year. He's actually a 90 against right-handed pitching, and he's played fairly often against right-handed pitching because Baldwin is fragile and does need time off from time to time, but only a 55 WRC plus in his 76 at-bats against left-handed pitching. And certainly with his career mark, even with this poor season being in the 80s, and the fact that he was a 135 a couple years ago, gave us some hope that he'd be a bit more productive against left-handed pitching than he has been thus far. Speaking of ineffective, Tyler Soderstrom is a guy who has had some really big years for us, and he's been a great value since he did sign a long deal with us early in this playthrough at a reasonable level, but having the worst season of his career, and he has been on a downward path the past several seasons, and he's gotten into his late 20s. 232 average, 9 homers and 24 ribbies, 81 WRC plus. He's been below replacement level as he's not that great defensively. Soderstrom has been in the lineup because he can hit righties, and unfortunately this year, like last year, hasn't really been the case with an 86 WRC plus. You can see his decline over the past few years. He won that random batting title in the World Series championship year of 2029 with a 323 average. Had a league best 168 WRC plus, which has deteriorated to 119, 102, and 81. Given his fragility, given his age, and given that he's not really doing what we need, he's a guy who, because of his relatively reasonable contract with just 2 team options left after this season, still has a little bit of trade value. Not incredible, but a little bit. And he's a guy that we might be willing to move on from, particularly with the left-handed hitting Kelnick in AAA and the right-handed hitting infielder Bob Day, hopefully not that far away. Another first baseman, Kevin Stubblefield, not having the glittering performance that he did for us in the playoffs last year when we called him up without major league experience. 231 average, 7 homers, 29 ribbies, 80 WRC plus. Like Soderstrom, he's ultimately been a bit below replacement level, having a Soderstrom-esque type of season, unfortunately. Looking at his ratings, he's better against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching. And when we take a look at the statistics, we actually don't see that thus far this year, as he's got a 90 WRC plus against righties, only a 65 WRC plus against lefties. Hopefully that will normalize going forward. But with Stubblefield, although he's a right-handed hitter rather than a left-handed hitter, has a very similar profile to Soderstrom. We think the bat can be good. The defense is acceptable, but not anything special. Having Stubblefield on board is another reason that maybe we can move on from Soderstrom eventually. Made a trade this past off season to bring on Jefferson Rojas, and he's actually been solid for us. 262 average, does have 21 doubles in 263 at-bats, 106 WRC plus, almost a win above replacement. He is a versatile player for us, primarily starting at second and third, but he has started a couple games for us at shortstop when Brian Rincon has needed a blow. Zone rating and defensive efficiency below average at both positions. He's not dynamic defensively, but he's acceptable, and he's at least hit, which we can't say about a lot of people on this team. Hasn't hit great, but he's hit respectably. Colt Keith, the batting average only 241, does still have 18 homers and 55 ribbies, so a 112 WRC plus. The worst year of his very nice stint in Oakland. He is in the final year of that contract he signed with Detroit years ago that we traded for. I wonder if his contract demands have come down a bit, and they really haven't. I'm still looking for $24.5 million over 8 years. So we wanted to see another card with Keith as far as this season, and with the fact that he's having the worst season of his stint in Oakland by far, and honestly the worst season since he was a rookie in terms of his WRC plus. Given his fragility and given that he's now on the wrong side of 30, although Keith's been incredibly important to us over these last 3.5 years, he could be in his final days in Oakland. The big question is whether over the next month we decide to remain buyers or perhaps turn into positions where we might be sellers. Justin LeBron, kind of a rough year for us. 223 average, just one homer in 139 at-bats, 73 WRC plus, and he's basically been replacement level. Does have that captain personality, another guy who's versatile defensively. Taking a look at his fielding statistics, he's been a little bit better for us than Mr. Rojas has, at least defensively, but Rojas has given us the offense that LeBron has not thus far. And speaking of a lack of offense, Brian Rincon brought him back this year to play shortstop for us, loving his defense. Our big concern was whether that fragility would end with him spending significant time on the IL. Knock on wood, that hasn't happened yet. But unfortunately, the offense has been just brutal. A 164 average, no home runs, and 9 ribbies in 262 at-bats, 56 WRC plus, kind of a historically awful offensive season potentially for Rincon, who could be a guy who plays 150 games as an everyday shortstop and ends up with fewer than 20 ribbies on the season if he doesn't get better. Hope that he does get better. He's still been above replacement level, obviously driven entirely by the glove, where his zone rating and defensive efficiency are borderline excellent, but need to get more offense out of Mr. Rincon to make bringing him back this year at over $10 million a decision that we won't regret. And we'll turn now to our outfielders, and this is clearly the area where if we had been able to sign a Bame or re-sign a Royce Lewis, may have layered one of those guys in as a left or right fielder for us, and certainly would have jolted our offense compared to what we have been largely getting. Chase DeLauder, hitting just 258 this year, does have 16 doubles, but only 2 homers, 86 WRC plus, and he's basically been replacement level. The left-handed hitter looks on paper like he should be useful against right-handed pitching with plus contact, really good gap power, although not a ton of speed, and an average power and average eye, but that magical 2029 postseason when he won both the ALCS and the World Series MVP seems a long way away at this point. And we actually are going to put Mr. DeLauder on the trade block, see if there's any interest at all in him. Center fielder Luis Alara, who had an outstanding year for us last year with a 4.3 WAR, has given us the less effective version of Alara this year. Batting average has dropped over 80 points to just 200. Only 7 steals after stealing 26 a year ago. Only 3 homers this year. So the 106 WRC plus from a year ago has dropped to a 66, and he's barely been above replacement level. Fielding-wise, he's been above average in center field, but not exceptional for us. John Rhodes, we brought up not that long ago. He's hit 325 with 3 doubles and a homer and 40 at-bats, 135 WRC plus. With the good performance, the great performance we've gotten from Kelly out of the bullpen, and the fact that Rhodes is doing even better than Fabian offensively, although clearly he is not as good a defensive player as Fabian, makes me feel good about that trade. Bobby Cabral, some of the negative factors that had us a little concerned about signing him to a long-term contract starting to factor in a bit. The batting average has dipped to 240, and he struck out 121 times midway through the season. That said, the guy still has 22 homers and 54 ribbies, still a 125 WRC plus, still a 1.1 WAR for him. The contract extension has come down a bit, 9 years, $124 million at this point. That's something we'll keep an eye on, but would prefer to buy low rather than high on Cabral. And Jake Ortega, the former 3rd overall pick, getting him into the majors has really helped with his development. He's improved his contact and his power both a notch over the last couple of months. The batting average stands right at 300, 21 doubles, 7 homers, 7 steals, 124 WRC plus, and a 1.8 WAR. So Ortega playing most every day for us in the majors, doing a nice job for us offensively, like his glove, with 25-year-old Cabral and 24-year-old Ortega in the mix for the outfield. Feel like even though the offense needs some help, we may have some guys who can be key parts of the offense over the next 5 or so years with Cabral, and hopefully over the next close to decade with Ortega with the contract we signed him to. But still could use another bat for the outfield, and still could probably use an upgrade somewhere in the infield. As I mentioned, we do have some potential levers down in AAA with the likes of Kelnick, Bob Day. We could reunite with Arakawa. We could finally bring Estrada up. Some of those are more defensive aid than offensive aid for this team, but we do have the opportunity to push some buttons in AAA, which is nice because they're not going to necessarily have to do this all through the trade market. And that is where we stand with this team. I'm still inclined to attempt to be a buyer over this month of July, but we'll see how the next 3 weeks or so go. If we are 18-4 over the next 3.5 weeks, we'll certainly be buyers and feeling better about things. If we're 4-18 over the next 3.5 weeks, we will likely have to become sellers and just admit that this isn't going to be the year that we had hoped. You can see attendance is way down, revenue is way down, so that's certainly not positive for us. Hopefully some of the moves that we make will ultimately boost fan interest a bit, and most importantly, if we start winning games more consistently, hopefully that will help fan interest as well. And before we finish up the episode, just a quick preview of the draft, which we'll be looking at a week from now in more detail, and hopefully getting the opinions of some of you who haven't forgotten us after we don't put out an episode for a week. Hopefully you'll be able to help us make the decision. We are going to be picking 22nd in the draft this year. And when we take a look at the mock draft, a very interesting thing, Amari Raphael, a pitcher who we had thought about picking in the first round 3 years ago when he was a high schooler, is projected to go 24th overall to the Braves with a compensatory pick. So he could be in the mix for us to pick up. Another guy that we had looked at a few years ago, the same draft, was Greg Cuff. He's projected to go 16th. So it's not inconceivable that we might be able to get one of those college players. Greg Cuff, probably a little less likely. The left fielder out of Ohio State certainly looks like he could be a very good offensive player. Not much defensively, not much speed, but 60 contact and 80 power if he were to reach his full development would play well. 21-year-old, projected to go before we'll be picking, but could be around. And then Amari Raphael seems a little more likely to be around. He is the high school pitcher that we were very impressed with. He ended up going to D3 Piedmont College. So we don't love the poor competition level that he's faced there. He's certainly been solid over his 3 years in D3. Still think that his stuff, movement, and control could all be well above average. Keeping the ball in the ballpark and not walking people are his two big weaknesses. Still has a lot of work to do on the changeup, but looks like he's got a pretty good chance of at least being a 4-pitch guy and maybe a 5-pitch guy. 21-year-old who throws in the high 90s, really good stamina, although he's not good at holding on runners. I would think that with the 22nd pick, if he's on the board, he's going to be a strong contender for us. As I noted, he's got some work to do on a couple of very important things, but he throws hard. His stuff is not far off major league quality. And if he does end up being around at 22, we will certainly be giving him a strong look in a couple of weeks when we get to the draft. And some of you may have noticed this. I hadn't noticed it until right this second, although I'm sure I've been clicking through on screens that said it. But as much as I've been talking about the woeful Texas Rangers and the fact that they've got a couple of starting pitchers on the market that we might be interested in, with the losses we suffered on this road trip, including the last few to the Yankees, we're actually in last place now, half a game behind those woeful Rangers. So we're appreciative that they still are looking to be sellers. But right now, we are in last place in the AL West. Still only 2 games out of the wild card, though, so I think, and we're supposed to be a 42-win team on paper, as we saw when we looked at the Pythagorean expectations. So we're 2 games out of the wild card, and if we hadn't gotten a bit unlucky, we'd actually be in a wild card spot right now. So the positive thing for us this year is that although the Yankees, the Royals, and the Astros are all running away with their divisions with double-digit leads, everyone else in the AL is pretty mediocre. Only the Angels have a winning record besides those 3 division leaders. So at 38 and 44, that means we are certainly in the mix. If you've got thoughts on what we should do over the next month or so as we get closer to the trade deadline, would love to hear them. Hope everybody has a great week. And until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.